right. Well, welcome to the first of our what we hope will be quarterly um, discussions about FDA warning letters as add-on to our weekly posts on LinkedIn that we call inadequate response, where we pick a warning letter and kind of break down what likely went wrong in the recipient's response to FDA initially that led to escalation to a warning letter, uh, along with talking about opportunities that they could have gotten right in the first place to have not been
Right.
in that situation in the first place. So, if you've been a fan of our postings, we try to read between the lines and note where there's a reason why you don't want to be a hobbyist in this industry. And there's some serious consequences, obviously, around patient and user safety. So there's a good reason for why, you need to be um, doing the right things in your quality system and in your regulatory compliance beyond just the fact that you have to do it to comply. So hopefully nobody takes that message away that it's just avoiding the warning letter is a good thing, but that's not the goal. The goal is to do the right thing in the first place.
Right. And really this is as you think about it, this is kind of the beginning of FDA's of any official action, right? Them sending you, hey, what you're doing is going to get you in trouble. And here's your warning, before we start actually taking court actions and other official actions. So, this is really a low FDA response
Yeah,
level in the big scheme of things. Obviously, you want to avoid it, but and most of what we want to do is voluntary in nature. The promises to correct and so forth that come from FTA 43s and those observations. Um, that starts it off, and this warning letter is just that next escalation and hey, you need to do something before you really get in trouble.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's just, always been, really good advice. you know. Um, But and I think that's a great point about that. The warning letter is like the first level of escalation, not the end level of escalation, and there are worse things that could potentially come if this continues. But it's usually not a good sign, right, to get to the warning letter. Although I don't know if we'll get to any through any of the last 90 days, but we do see some warning letters where the company's getting the warning letter regardless. Didn't matter how good their response was because what was found was so serious that it doesn't matter whether or not they responded well. FDA is still not amused, right? And they're still
Right.
going to get you the warning letter. So, as we look at the past 90 days, there were over 120 warning letters put
Yeah.
out there. But of course, that's for all of FDA and all of its responsibilities. Um, we're going to focus on mainly drugs and devices, but there were warning letters in tobacco and food, biologics, which actually we could will consider as part of the drugs, and veterinary as well.
Yeah.
But on the drug side, if you include the biologics, there were 57 warning letters out of that 122, and only 10 for devices. Um, and that's pretty much been the trend every quarter, really, that there's more on the pharma side than on the devices side. And I don't know that that's necessarily an indication that devices is in better shape than drugs, or just the number of drug facilities. And we'll as we'll talk about here, you see a lot of very similar observations because drug facilities tend to be very similar in nature, whereas devices, being such a broad span of things that could be a device, you see, I think, a broader spectrum of violations.
Well, and I think that, a lot of the devices honestly are going through hospitals and that type of stuff. So whereas a lot of the drugs and some of these biologics and stuff go direct to consumer, FDA has a much higher level of concern about that and whose hands it's going into. So they'll take this quicker action
Yeah.
towards those drugs and those types of
And I
things.
think as we talk about it, we'll see there's a pattern to a lot of the drug warning letters are to companies that haven't even bothered to register as a drug manufacturer, right? They put all these kind of iffy things out there that, they,
And and that's the thing that'll get you to that instant warning letter.
right. Yeah. Um, Whereas you don't see that. Yeah, every once in a while you'll see somebody who didn't register as a device manufacturer, but generally with the devices, it's usually more they're registered. Now we're showing up, and yeah, you're not managing your facility well, and your good manufacturing practices are not good, right?
Right.
Whereas drugs, a lot of times it's like, what are you doing on the market? That's a drug. You can't just go out and sell that over the counter to people. So I think we'll have some opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah. You
Uh,
can't put up your Amazon store to
yeah,
sell drugs.
and during the quarter, Amazon was a recipient of warning letters, so they are pinging the kind of the I, I don't know if you can't call them distributors, but kind of the storefronts for these
Right.
places and going, you're responsible as well for this, right? So Amazon and CVS and I think Walmart. I don't know if it was this past quarter, but I think last year Walmart got nailed. So yeah, it just says, look, you can't just fall behind. Oh, I just put up the website and make them, make those vendors have a space to put
Nope,
it up.
that's placing the
Or it's
product
fine.
on the market.
Yeah, you're still part of that supply chain now. Um, yeah, so I mean, we can start with the devices because there's fewer of them. Um, there were two that fit into that category of, hey, your device isn't approved at all. Um, One of them, and this is sort of scary because it was a tampon, and the company wasn't even registered. So they're
Yeah.
selling, feminine products that are considered medical devices, and it's
Well,
not,
and I think that's one of the things though that you can fall into that trap. Well, it's just a tampon. That's not a medical device. Yeah, it is. It has a indication for use that is a treatment. And so you have to understand that you fall into that definition of medical device. So we're not going to, FDA is not going to let you skirt around that.
yeah, right. And I think too often the people that aren't knowledgeable or they're just looking to make a buck don't really think about the breadth of that definition of device,
Yeah.
right? And so, because we'll see there's, or of drug for that matter, we'll see things later about like sunscreens or a popular target of FDA, right? Nobody thinks of
Yeah.
that being a drug, but it is when you look at the definition, right? And the claims of what it does.
One I dealt with early in my career was a cane.
Hmm.
Right? It's just a stick. No, it has a medical purpose.
Yeah, right.
In the stability and those things that you're indicating for, and you have to show that it performs, it's effective, and it's safe. It's not going to break.
Yeah. The
Those
other
sorts.
one
Yeah.
that was an unapproved device was an aspiration device. So for getting, fluids and liquids, out of the body.
Yeah.
And this one was interesting. They were registered. They were going through the 510(k) process, the pre-market notification process, but they just sort of ignored anything FDA said, and they just kept forging forward until they put their device on the market because there was the initial 510(k) got rejected with a refuse to accept because they weren't providing really solid data. Um, they just didn't, they weren't dotting their I's and crossing their T's. And FDA said, look, this isn't a valid, submission. You need to redo this. And then later they were found to, they did respond, but they falsified their data in there. It was determined that they were not providing truthful information. Uh, and like I said, the company just kept forging forward. It was like they felt like it was a checklist exercise. Yeah, we submitted, we answered their questions, but they weren't really thinking about what the answers they got back. And then ultimately, then FDA went in and inspected the facility, and then there's a whole bunch of CGMP problems with. Well, they didn't really have design controls. They barely had document controls, and they certainly weren't managing complaints, right? Those kind of things. So it's just you know those to me are pretty egregious because it's a company that says, well, we saw the rules and then we just thumbed our noses at them. Right?
Yeah, and I think again, that's going to happen lots of times with these lower risk devices that, you get kind of a marketing person's cavalier or a salesperson cavalier and said, yeah, it works. And it's like, but do you actually have the evidence that it works? Right? And this is one of those things that we often say, right? If it's not documented, it doesn't exist, or it didn't happen.
Mhm.
Um, and you certainly can't make stuff up.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the falsified responses is just like,
Yeah,
it's kind of like, did they not think that FDA would ever check at some point, right? Come in and say, well, let's see that data. Yeah, it's that was another disturbing one.
yeah.
Um, Beyond that, then so like I said, there were 10 for devices. The other eight were all kind of the CGMP adulterated, misbranded um, kind of warning letters. What I found interesting there was, I think you can mistakenly believe that, well, it's probably these small startups that get in trouble. Uh, but in the case of six of these eight warning letters for CGMP and such that were US based, three were large companies, like really large companies, and three were small companies.
Okay.
I think the key there is to show that, yeah, even the big guys, the big players that have the resources to do this right, still managed to do the wrong things. And then there were two OUS device manufacturers in the mix there as well.
And I think, Steve, this again goes in that category of sometimes they think they know better than the FDA, and
Yeah,
they'll say, you know, yeah, whatever, we're doing things right. We're a big company, we know what we're doing. Leave us alone. And they're like, no, no, really, you show us. No, really, you know, your processes look like they have holes in them to us and tell us why we're wrong. Not just, you know, without evidence,
Mhm.
actually show us the evidence that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, right. And I don't think it was in the last 90 days, but I think there was one last year that I looked at in a company, and they just tried to argue back that they weren't a device, right? FDA's telling them you're a device, and they're just arguing back, no, 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 we're not. You're misapplying the regulation to us. It's like, that kind of argument's probably not going to get you very far. You know,
Yeah.
right?
Um,
Yeah, because again, they're going to look at those claims, and right, and the claims so clearly put them, over the line into devices, and they were sitting there saying, "No, no, no, you're misunderstanding what this device is for." And it's like, "No, you're misrepresenting it, and we're not going to buy that." Um,
and and we've seen, you see that out there occasionally too, is that, there's companies that have products out there on the market that they know they're not being used according to how they've labeled it. We call them off-label use, right? But
yeah,
they know that it's being used in that way. Um, and that that happening is you have something you can do about it. Companies want to say, well, we can't help how they use their product. Yes, you can. You can stop selling the product. That is the ultimate control.
right.
You
Yeah,
you have the ability to do those things. And you should be able to do those things. And FDA, if you don't, FDA will help you do that.
yeah. But I've also seen I don't know if it's a trend or proliferation, but more so on the drug side, particularly on biologics. A lot of companies just simply slapping a not for human use label on the device or on the drug. Um, and then FDA looks back at the claims and goes, well, you're saying right here to use it on human beings, and here you're saying not for human use, or for research. I've seen a couple that say for research purposes only. And
Yeah.
then right away, their website talks about, how this can help your patients. Right? You're like, well, those two things are diametrically opposed, kind of thing.
Oh,
So yeah, it it's one thing when they, like you said, either through hubris or misunderstanding, and they just misinterpret the requirements and go wrong, versus where it just looks like a clear intentional attempt, right, to get around the regulations,
for sure.
which really speaks to the ethics of the situation. When we look at the device CGMP violations, it's a pretty big laundry list, but the thing that stood out to me that never is a surprise, again, Kappa was the number one citation in there. Um, and I'm always just amazed at how it's always, right? every year when they publish the metrics, it's always up there number one. I think one year it dropped to number two, and then it quickly came back to number one the next year. It's like, how many decades are we not going to understand how to do Kappa correctly? Um,
Well, and one of the things that I've said, kappa, that corrective action, preventive action thing, is really it comes down to risk, right? Because you have an issue and you want to prevent recurrence or prevent occurrence of that issue. And so you're reducing risk. Well, that's what FDA's primary task is, right? Safe. The freedom from unacceptable risk. And so if they identify a risk and they feel it's not acceptable, then the product's not safe. And so that's why they point directly at that because they expect the improvements to make your product safe.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, so not a surprise that Kappa continues to be up there. And then the other two that were kind of in second place was reporting and acceptance activities. Um, and the reporting also seems to be pretty common, right? Where people don't establish the criteria. They may be handling complaints, but then they don't establish criteria for when do they have to then,
Well,
when is it a reportable event, kind of thing.
because
Um,
because FDA isn't they can't be out there watching everything, right? So that's why they have mandatory reporting as a manufacturer.
right.
Well, instantaneously to me, if you're not reporting or underreporting or then I go to that other direction of you're hiding things from me because you don't want me to know about your problems. And so
Yeah.
again, I'm going to automatically go to that. That's a level of risk in not having safe product because that's the early warning system. And
Yeah.
so if you're not telling FDA about those things, they're immediately going to, move you towards that warning letter, that official action direction. So these types of things, I mean, you have to think about the FDA's focus and safe and effective, that safety thing being paramount. And so if you have a product that's hurting people, or if not taking actions to improve your product, FDA is going to jump all over you in a hurry.
Yeah. Agreed. And then the other one I mentioned, the acceptance activities. When we talk a little bit more about the drug warning letters, that one's really prevalent in drug, but it's the same thing. It's just, especially around incoming inspection, this over reliance on certificates from the supplier and not following up on that and understanding what's in there. It's, I'm sure you've seen this as well during audits that we do,
Yeah,
um, where they just simply check off whether they received the certificate. They don't even look at the content of the certificate, right?
yeah,
And we've been there where we found companies where it's like you missed the fact that the certificate showed they were out of spec and
yeah.
you didn't even read it, or you're not capturing any trends, so you can't see what's coming, right? And all of a sudden they're always on the high side or the low side or something. But it's just,
And
yeah,
again,
and
this
they
is
just
that
assume
early
it.
warning thing to know that your product is good going out the door. You are responsible for that product. You can't blame it on your supply chain. You can't blame it on, well, we had an operator that wasn't paying attention that day. No, this is the most important things that you're doing before you send out your product out to the market. You gotta make sure that it's good.
Right,
Um,
yeah. And we'll see that when we talk about drugs here in a second, that there's a lot of violations related to the final uh, inspection, right?
for
Uh,
sure.
and it's like, yeah, the rules are pretty clear. Yeah, you can't ship it until you're positive you know what's in it, right? And the same thing would apply for devices.
So let's
Uh,
let's move on to the drug side, Steve.
Yeah, so let's move on to drugs. One of the things that's interesting, I broke down kind of the location of these things. Um, 23 were US based companies. And, if you read the warning letters, it can almost seem like it's always India and China and places outside the US, but actually the majority were US based drug manufacturers.
Sure.
OUS was 18 out of the total. But then we were talking about this earlier. The interesting thing was 10 warning letters based on internet only companies
Wow.
where there's not even an address. They email it to the website and they go,
They
according to
exist
your
in the
website,
ether
you're selling this and you're making these claims. And it's not just this last quarter. Watching last year, there's just a lot of that, and right, and that gets us to the unapproved thing, and it won't be a surprise what's there. right? There's a sudden desire for these weight loss medications,
Oh yeah.
right? Male enhancement, let's call it that, is another target, right? Where it's an expensive drug normally, requiring prescriptions in both cases, weight loss and this. And then more recently, a lot of stuff around skin treatments and wound treatments and analgesics has popped up more recently. And again, that could be this thing that people don't realize. Things like creams and sunscreens are considered drugs.
Yeah.
They address a
I
bodily
remember some of
function.
the initial stuff that we did on inadequate response, Steve, was about essential oils and some of the
Yeah,
claims that were made for essential oils,
right.
those natural products, right?
Yeah.
But once you start making medical claims with them, they become a drug that's regulated.
Yeah. So essentially, half of the drug related warning letters were for unapproved drugs, and so that's
Wow.
where, and then 10 of those, like I said, were just internet only companies. When I look at these things, I always go to the website and see what's there, because you're thinking, well, is there some fly by night thing and you should, buy or be warned, right? You should know better. But sometimes they're very slick websites and they look absolutely legitimate. And sometimes they even make claims of being FDA registered, uh, like that, or that it's um, clinically investigated or something like that, where you find all these weird terms that really say nothing about whether the drug should be on the market or not, or the fact that it is a drug.
Well, I
Uh,
know there's a lot of very, talented marketing people that put this information together, and they don't realize sometimes, I think that was what we talked about with regard to, um, that essential oils and those types of things. You have people that are in multi-level marketing type things where they're, just acting with a storefront that they based on what the company gave them as information, and they just figure that they're passing, quote unquote, passing on that information. And it's like, understand that you've gone into this healthcare area, that you have some responsibilities to make sure that the product actually does what it says it does,
yeah,
even though you're just a pass through, right?
right. Yep. Yeah, and I think that, like I said, that gets missed a lot. Um, Another one, again, it shouldn't have been, I guess it didn't surprise me. And when I look at the drug warning letters that involve misbranded drugs, a lot of it has to do with ingredients not being identified. And that's kind of scary. And it's again the things that are popular right now. So the semaglutides that are used in the, Ozempics and the Mounjaros, the weight loss medications.
Wegovy and those
So
types
they're
of things.
selling supplements, right? And what they're not, that'll help you lose weight, burn fat, whatever, right? And what they're not telling you is they're giving you Ozempic, and a lot of times in quantities that shouldn't be given, right? And then the other part of it is, not correctly identifying quantities or percentages. So even if they are putting the thing on the right ingredient on the label, they're misrepresenting how much of it is in there. The other one is when you a lot of this. Male enhancement supplements, they're sneaking in Viagra, Cialis, and Tadalafil into those things, and that's really dangerous there because those things can have huge impacts on people who have heart issues and other issues. Uh,
Right,
and again, none of those things are allowed for over the counter. Right? You have to have a medical professional give you a prescription so that they can determine if it's even safe for you to take.
right.
Um, but yeah, and the incorrect or unidentified quantities or percentages. I saw one recently that was an analgesic cream, kind of meant for like it looked like they were selling to tattoo parlors, right? So that you can numb the skin and then do the
Sure.
tattoo. And it was these products had lidocaine in them, right? The
Yep.
same thing your dentist will use to numb your gums. And I think in one of them it was like 10% lidocaine, which is like way over what these products are supposed to have. I
Yeah,
mean, if you buy like, one of the over-the-counter pain creams, right? Like Icy Hot or something like that, they're at like 1 or 2% lidocaine, right? If they even have lidocaine at all, some of them don't. But 10% is just like, oh, yeah, it'll definitely numb your skin, I guess. But but you got to remember it goes through the skin, gets into the blood system, and now you've got lidocaine in your body at high percentages. So
Yeah.
some of these, yeah, just really pretty scary.
So
So I
Steve,
think we talked about all the scary stuff. I think
yeah,
the other thing, right, the lessons learned here is
right.
what we see in terms of patterns. When you read between the line and where FDA goes, we've reviewed your response and found it to be inadequate, and then they kind of give an explanation. And it's sort of like this is why you should get help before responding. you
Yeah.
know, and have people who understand what are the correct words and what is FDA really looking for. The most obvious one you think anybody would get to me is when basically they're not providing any evidence of completed actions. So they're saying, "Oh yeah, we opened a kappa or we fixed this," and then they don't provide anything that says, "Well, what was the fix, right? What actions did you take?"
What actions did
And
you actually take? Yeah.
and if you're going to say things like, "Yeah, we updated the procedure," you have to give them a copy of the procedure, right? So they can see what changed.
Right.
That to me is like a real rookie error. Um, there's also, there is some trending there around, the actions proposed are not really going to be effective. It's like they just took a guess at, what might be a good action, and they pick things that you go, that's not really going to solve your problem. They're either ineffective or they're going to be inadequate to address what was observed, which just sort of sounds like, you know, you're giving lip service to, FDA's findings. You're not really understanding how concerned they are. Um,
Well, and you continue to see a lot of well, we'll retrain operators, retrain somebody.
mhm.
It's like, how many times do you have to retrain somebody and they aren't getting it? It's time to move on to something else.
Right.
We talk about, what effective actions are. I see it in manufacturing all the time. They're going to say they're retrained operators, and I'm like, well, can't you put a fixture or something in place so they do this right every single time?
Yeah. Right.
No, and what would actually be an effective action? Um, the things that I've found is the agency, as you work with the agency and you suggest things that you do, again, any auditor worth their salt is going to be able to help you understand what evidence they need to say that it's effective, what actions are adequate corrective actions when we identify something. Because we've all had the experience, we're glad to help people understand what an effective action would be.
Yeah.
Because we've seen ones that are ineffective, we've seen ones that are effective. Use our experience to do that.
Yeah. I think to me, it's what you touched on here that was really important was this tendency to blame the people in the process rather than looking for what's inadequate about the process, right?
Right,
So that the people can't, human factors is always going to be a challenge, and humans, are always going to probably be the weak part. So, like you said, what can you do to understand human behavior and not allow it to be possible? Fixtures, poka-yoke kind of thinking. And I think that's a big part of this when people propose these actions, and they're all around updating the work instruction and retraining people. And it's like, okay, you're just making a process more clear, but you haven't really made the process better as a
right.
result, right? You're hoping that people understand what to do better. Um, yeah, some of the other things that are interesting. This is one I always, ping on, in those postings on LinkedIn. Was not investigating beyond what FDA told you was wrong, right? Missing the point that FDA inspections are a sampling. And so they see evidence of a nonconformity. And when they report it to you, what they're saying is, go find the rest of them. you know? But you see a lot of these, and you read between the lines, you can tell they put their blinders on and they fixed that particular issue.
Yeah.
And FDA is going, sorry, that's an inadequate response. You
Data,
didn't go back
data,
and look
data
at
missing on this device history. Yes, you fixed that one, but how are you preventing that from happening again?
right. And how far
What are
back
you
does
doing
this
in the
go, right? How
process?
many how
Yeah,
many devices did you put on the market that have the same problem, right? There's no retrospective investigation, or it's just very narrow. You didn't look at similar processes or similar devices. I did see one like that recently where they were making a whole family of devices, and the only thing they investigated was the one device where FDA had looked at, and FDA went, "What about the other eight that are just like this? You didn't include that information at all," kind of thing.
Yeah.
The another one is just that if you had somebody professional helping you, you wouldn't have done this. Is just sort of the empty promise response. Yep, we hear you. We're going to go fix that process, and then
Yeah, and
nothing
that,
else. Right?
I mean that I know the way that that happens because having been through several FDA inspections, what happens at the closing meeting with an FDA inspector is they read their observations and ask for your response. And most of the time the response is noted, promise to correct. And so people think, well, the inspector was there and I told them my response, so I don't need to write a response now. No, wrong. Okay, you need to actually get your 483 and now take the time, put together a written response and send it in. Okay, that's your adequate response. So, what's an adequate response to a finding? You investigate the issue, you determine the cause or root cause, and then identify the actions to be taken on a timeline, right? And then you're going to give updates to that as those actions are completed. Say this one's done, the next one's done. We have two more actions left, and then it's like all actions are completed, close them out, right?
Yeah, yeah. It
All of
gets
those things should
to
be happening.
sometimes the response is, excuse me, not that FDA says, "Oh, your response is inadequate," but they go, "We reviewed your response and we can't determine yet, right?
What
Because
actions are taken?
it's going to take time, which is okay. It might be that, yeah, this is hard to solve. It's going to take time, but you provided no way in which you're going to do. How am I going to update you periodically to show that we're making progress, including right now? How far have we gotten? And there's just no information about that. And FDA's gone. We're not impressed if you can't tell us how this is going to progress and how
Right.
far you've gotten so far. Um, that gets to the whole timeliness kind of thing. You see somewhere usually in the warning letter they'll say we received your response on this date, and it's somewhere at the beginning of the letter it says this is in regards to an inspection we performed, and you do the timeline calculation. And again, there's no regulation that says you have to respond to your 483 within a certain amount of time, but we know, like with warning letters, it's 15 working days.
Yep.
And
Two
I always
weeks.
tell people just use that same timeline for your 483s, because the longer you sit on it and play the game, well, you didn't say we had to respond even, right? It's just FDA is waiting and see what you're going to do if you're going to take this seriously.
Right.
I mean, are you actually committed? Because to your point, you may have said at the end of the audit, yeah, we commit to fixing this, and they don't hear from you for 3 months, right? They don't forget.
Yeah, I mean, but uh, you're not going to get a letter from them like you do from your notified bodies saying, "Hey, you owe us a response within, you know, 30 days or whatever." They're just they give you here's your 483 and then they leave it up to you. Now, they're not going to call you in 3 weeks and say, "Hey, we haven't received your response." You're not going to get anything from them if you haven't responded in 3 months. And you're going to say, "Oh, no news is good news." No, they're keeping track of you. I guarantee it.
Yep, exactly.
And
Yeah, this is
especially if
this
you
is
have
adulting,
another,
right? They
especially if
expect
you're
you to
an
be adults.
organization that has another facility, you can expect that they might go visit that other facility, based on that they haven't received any responses from you.
Yeah.
And so this is where often we tell organizations, look, working with the FDA gets you good responses from the FDA. That they're not gonna, again, what do I want to say? That sometimes the organizations are saying, why is the FDA picking on me? Well, what was your response to them? If you cooperate with them, they cooperate with you. If you're bucking the system, they're gonna keep pressing you. Guarantee it.
Yeah, playing chicken with FDA is not a good strategy. They've
Okay?
been at it longer than you have.
Yeah.
It's the same as don't argue the regulations with them. Remember, they wrote them.
Right.
They do
And
understand
that
them.
that goes into I think one of the last ones we have is about these illogical conclusions.
Mm,
You know, if you think that the inspector doesn't know what they're talking about, and you don't follow the logic, something's missing there. The if this then that has to have some logic to it.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
And there were, I grabbed that one because I did see a couple of warning letters where it's just like the response was sort of baffling. It's just like, okay, you apparently didn't understand the concern that FDA raised and like answered a completely different question. Or it looks like you're trying to put up a smoke screen and deflect them in a different direction. And again, they're not going to be fooled by that.
yeah, they're looking for the substance, not the weight of the response. Number of pages that you send them doesn't really make a difference. They're looking that you actually have substantial corrections and corrective actions that you're taking.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like when I teach about audit preparation, right? And I talk about avoiding the please dig here flags. Poor responses just beg FDA to dig deeper. Like I said, oh, well, then we'll go to another site or we'll come back to your site. Or now we're gonna really turn up the heat. We had a couple of notations. Now we're gonna pull those out into the warning letter. We didn't actually put them on the 483, but there is right. The inspector has their report where they have their other notes, and suddenly I've seen some warning letters like that where FDA got annoyed and came back and said, "Well, we acknowledge this part wasn't on your 483, but the auditor did, the inspector did make note of this, and now we're going to pull it out front and center. We were going to let you get by with that one, but not anymore."
Right.
So play your games and see where it goes. So
So, I mean, a lot of this, Steve, gets down to, understanding what the expectations are, and creating that culture of cooperation, that you know, if you didn't understand the observations, that you did the adequate clarifications to understand that so you can do an adequate investigation, complete that adequate investigation and determine what your actions are going to be from that, um, and work to improve. Um, in maturity and as organizations mature and look at that, they get better and better at doing this, and responding to those things that the FDA has pointed out, so that you do have an adequate response.
right, yeah. Yeah, and that's an important thing to note. I mean, it doesn't happen a lot, but um, in some of these warning letters, again, sometimes you get it just because the situation was so serious. But there was one again. I don't know if it was in the last 90 days, but sometime in the past year, I saw one where yeah, it was pretty serious. So they were getting the warning letter no matter what. But everything in the warning letter said your response was adequate. Right. And that one might be confusing. Well, why would we get a warning letter if we give a good response? Well, because the initial findings were so serious. I can't remember what it was for. It may have been for a drug for some really high risk disease. And they were like, you're not maintaining aseptic, you know, capabilities and you're not doing all the right acceptance criteria, either at the beginning or the end of the process and all that stuff. Um, but the response, FDA said your response is great, but you're still getting a warning letter because we have to in this situation. But
Right, and a lot of this is being done in the same way as any other audit. It's having the appropriate documentation so that you don't backslide.
right,
They're all FDA warning letters are reviewed by the FDA lawyers. And it's done that way because, FDA is an enforcement agency, and they're always preparing to go towards court if they need to. And so that's why they're preparing this evidence.
right.
And then you start getting the stack of evidence that they can take more serious formal, official actions.
Yeah, as we said at the start, the warning letter is not the end of the process. It's really putting you on the pathway, and you want to get off it again as quickly as you can there. I was just going to throw it at the end here that, again, not to sound like a plug for us, but this idea of making sure you get the right help you need to do this well. Certainly, if you talk about organizational maturity, if right, you're a startup or you're a young company or not very big, you should assume you got yourself into this trouble. You should get some professional help to get out of it. And FDA more and more is putting that right in the letter, right, where they sense, look, we think you guys need help. They don't say it that way, but you need to go get a GMP consultant, CGM consultant to help you with this.
Right.
The other side of that is even if you're a larger organization where you have all the right resources, you have hundreds and hundreds of people in your quality and regulatory organization, I still push back and I go, look, I'd be taking a healthy skepticism to this and go, I'm not saying you have a incompetent team, but if that team lets you get into this situation, why would you assume they know how to get you out of it?
Right.
Right? Maybe it's time to get a third opinion on this, or a second opinion on this, and see somebody's outside view to help you refine all of that.
For sure.
All right, good talk.